Most studies of conformity and deviance, which scholars use to see as opposite sides of the same coin, have been done in social systems more stable than Aaron Beppe. There has been little research on the origin of social deviance. Aaron Beppe sheds new light on this matter. Developments there suggest that as new groups, including potentially deviant ones, emerge within a formerly undifferentiated social system, attributes once seen merely as idiosyncratic personality traits of individuals serve as models for the construction of the new deviant social categories. Therefore, individual behavior of a certain sort is used to assign many people to a particular category. Once people are so assigned, and as they accept their new label or social identity, their behavior becomes more restricted and more stereotypical of their category. They acquire a role personality, to use a term from labeling theory. Anthropologists interested in social evolution have tended to base their theories on culture change on such major generations-long changes as are revealed by the archaeological record or chronicled in historical documents. There is also value in studying sociocultural microevolution, the change process that Aaron Beppe has experienced. Some of the more intimate and gradual changes in individuals' experience, attitudes, and behavior that accumulate over the years so they are finally perceptible as major structural changes can be observed in a living context in places like Aaron Beppe, where the forces of change are working rapidly and dramatically. It is likely, for example, that the modeling of social categories out of individual idiosyncrasies, as is illustrated in this discussion of the rise of social deviance, is an important generalized characteristic of social microevolution. It's probably one of the most powerful mechanisms by which social complexity grows. Thus, by 1980, the behavior of unusual people in Aaron Beppe was no longer seen as idiosyncratic, but as diagnostic of membership in newly recognized social groups. The rich, alcoholics, the mentally ill, candomblé participants, and so on. This process of social differentiation was ongoing and not yet complete. The new categories were neither fully nor consistently stereotyped or stigmatized. Their members were not yet recognized as full-fledged social deviants. Villagers were still building the stereotypes to go along with the new labels. Missing in the evaluations of unusual co-villagers were the criticism, anger, and outrage that in other places accompany a clear image of deviance as a rule violation, as going beyond acceptable social behavior. Aaron Bapeiros devalued two social categories, but neither described a native villager. Partly stigmatized were the hippies and the other parrots who spoke incompletely or inappropriately. True outrage was reserved for just one label, the robber, always an outsider. Their images of hippies and robbers helped Aaron Bapeiros distinguish their own social system from the outside world, since no such labels set one group off from another among native villagers. Another reason why full-fledged social deviance had not yet emerged is that deviance requires conformity, in which Aaron Beppe has always been deficient. Aaron Beppe had never fully fitted Robert Redfield's 1948-1960 stereotype of the folk society or little community. Like the folk society, the Aaron Beppe had been small, relatively isolated, homogeneous, and non-literate. But unlike the folk society, Aaron Beppe lacked a strong sense of social cohesion. To identify and stigmatize deviant behavior and individuals, strong community solidarity is needed. People must agree on social rules and appropriate behavior. Aaron Beppe never had the uniformity, the cohesion, and the shared standards necessary to stigmatize internal deviance. Aaron Beppe had always been an individualistic village with divergent views. Furthermore, after 1970, it witnessed very rapid change through contact with varied models of behavior associated with many external groups. In Aaron Beppe of the 1960s, with its wide personality variation, there were almost as many types of individuals as there were people. There had been no typical Aaron Bepeiro. In the 1980s, who could say what category was normal or typical? Business person, boat owner, fisherman, captain, immigrant, factory worker, construction worker, hippie, weekender, summer person, alcoholic, twin, mentally ill, candomblé participant, landowner, anthropologist. One noteworthy feature of the old social structure, race relations seem mostly to have escaped the process of social differentiation. Villagers still didn't discriminate on the basis of skin color or recent slave ancestry. For example, Dino, Aaron Beppe's richest native, had very dark skin. Working for him as a fish hauler and washer was one of the lightest men in town, the brother of a prominent storekeeper. Two other very light men also worked as menials for a much darker boat owner. A teacher, who would be considered white in the United States, had a common law liaison with a very young merchant to whose babies she had just given birth. Although villagers still employed multiple racial labels in the 1980s, fewer such terms were common use than in the 1960s. Local racial terminology seemed to be changing through contact with outsiders who make fewer but more consistent racial distinctions. Gender roles were in more obvious flux. Women's dress was more informal and revealing in the 1960s, when Betty Wagley Kotak had been embarrassed about wearing even a one-piece bathing suit to take a dip in the Atlantic. By 1980, bikinis and halter tops were common sights. One afternoon I saw Alberto's 25-year-old daughter washing dishes outside in her bathing suit, while a young neighbor disco danced on her porch wearing a skimpy halter and shorts. Women's work, like men's, had become less communal. Formerly, after the men left to fish, the women would take the pots and pans from last night's dinner down to the lagoon to wash. In the afternoon, before the fishermen returned, the women would use the lagoon to do their laundry and bathe. In the 1980s, washing was no longer as social. Women with access to well water washed at home. Men still controlled public space, as my observation of behavior around the fish stores one afternoon revealed. As the boats were unloaded, I wandered in and out of the two fish weighing stations just south of the chapel. This whole area has always been male territory. Men used to sit on the chapel stoop in the evening. The only female who would approach them were elderly women and little girls sent to get their fathers. In 1980, the broken strings of kites littered the electric wires here. Only boys played in the area, the behavior of the juveniles foreshadowing the sex-linked privileges of adulthood. In the shacks, men engaged in mock homosexual play and called each other vaedo, queer, said Albert to a little boy wandering by with no pants, pointing to the child's genitals. "If you walk by my house like that, I'll castrate you." Male territory. Only certain females could enter. One such woman was Dino's wife, who sat in front of their fish store. This well-to-do woman, wearing glasses and an attractive dress, seemed to have left old gender roles, which limited female access to outside social space behind. Another woman who was comfortable in this area was Italy, daughter of Claudia, the founder of Aaron Bepe's most successful restaurant. Along with the restaurant, Italy had inherited her mother's right to move through the male social space. Italy strode into the fish store and soon got a choice fish. On the counter where the fish store employee cut up and sold fish sat his 5-year-old stepdaughter. Some slightly older girls came in to fetch fish, but they were shy and soon left. An old alcoholic woman stood in the crowd of would-be buyers. She was pestering the fish store employee for a dole, but he got tired of her raucous pleas and called her a slut. The most spectacular female interest was that of Julia, the psychotic nudist. She had returned that day from Salvador, having once again talked her way out of the psychiatric facility and taken a bus home. Scantily dressed, as usual, she began dancing, to no audible music, outside the fish store. Gradually she took off the towel wrapped around her upper body. She lit a cigarette and continued dancing. I was distracted by the arrival of a van marked Civil Police, which pulled up near Julia. As 3 officers stepped out, I had visions of Julia being taken back to the city, but this intrusion of the state on Aaron Bepe's international affairs was not to be. The police officers had come to buy fish. They ignored Julia, who, deciding not to test her luck, wandered off. The news spread rapidly of Julia's return and her near encounter with the law. Other villagers, including Julia's aunt, said they had been as apprehensive as I had. These women, Dino's wife, Italy, Julia, and the alcoholic beggar, illustrate the limits on social gender roles. Public space was still a male domain where just a few women felt comfortable. The females with the greatest access to public space were businesswomen, small girls, alcoholics, the mentally ill. In the old days, village prostitutes had also dared to encroach on male territory. Although deviant categories had not fully formed, potentially deviant individuals had one thing in common. They were more likely than others to take part in candomblé. Candomblé participants included alcoholics, twins, former village prostitutes, audacious women, Aaron Bepe's only known native male homosexual, and troubled immigrants such as Fernando, who had a strong fear of outsiders. The growing interest in candomblé was one more aspect of Aaron Bepe's opening to the outside world. Several candomblé participants lived in Aaron Bepe by 1980, compared with none during the 1960s, when, however, 2 natives were learning about candomblé in Salvador. One, Crispin, came back to Arambepe in 1973. By 1980, he had become the main local candomblé master. Crispin was a full-fledged Padre Santo, or Saint's Father, with a reputation extending beyond Arambepe. The Filhas de Santo, Saint's daughters, who assisted him, came from Arambepe and nearby villages. There was even a tourist from Rio de Janeiro studying candomblé with Crispin for a fee of about $165. The other native who had been active in candomblé in Salvador in the 60s was Maria. She had moved back to Arambepe in 1964 but couldn't show her skills as a recipient of spirits until the arrival of the Saint's father, Crispin, almost a decade later. By 1980, Maria, the mouthpiece of 21 spirits, was regarded as merely the most talented of Crispin's dozen acolytes. Crispin had some competition as Arambepe's spiritual leader. An equally competent Mel de Santo, Saint's mother, also began holding candomblés in Coronas in the mid-1970s, but she was a native of Salvador and was still building a local social network. Crispin could draw on his social links as a native Arambepero. Two other Saints' mothers visited occasionally. One had a candomblé house in Coronas, active part of the year. The other woman practiced candomblé only in Salvador. In Arambepe, she was just a summer person. I was surprised at the extent to which candomblé illustrated increasing local involvement with the external systems. Candomblé members, it turned out, weren't autonomous individuals, but part of a much larger group. To call oneself a spirit father or mother and to open a house of candomblé, Crispin and the others had to be licensed. They had official cards from a central candomblé organization in Salvador. Licensing followed instruction from a member. Maria and the other saints' daughters lacked these cards. They could practice only through attachment to saints' fathers and mothers. Religion's new prominence reflected both local and regional changes. Through the 1960s, Arambeperos had rarely seen agents of organized religion. Even the Pentecostals, who had won converts in nearby Abrantes, had avoided Arambepe, which had just one Protestant. A Catholic priest settled in Abrantes in 1974 and started visiting Arambepe regularly. He gave weekly Monday night masses and a daytime mass one Sunday a month. Also around 1974, a group of nuns moved to the Coronas, where villagers built them a house. Arambeperos had come to see the sisters as part of community life. Replacement nuns were sent every few years. No one thought it strange that the nuns often attended candomblé to enjoy the festive atmosphere. Many villagers see Catholicism and candomblé, both of which are local manifestations of larger religions, as different systems rather than competing religions. The Catholic Church and Baha'i seem to have absorbed the prevailing urban opinion of candomblé as part of traditional Bahan culture, like regional cuisine, good for tourism, and no threat to Roman Catholicism. Indeed, the syncretism of Catholic American, Native American behavior and beliefs in candomblé is well known. Greater local ceremonial activity rested not just on better access to external religious systems, but also on the new economy. In the 1960s, villagers had too little money to support a spirit guide or to pay for instruction in how to get possessed, as in other societies. Ceremonial activity intensified in the prosperous season and the summer, which always has been Arambepe's festive period. Villagers complained that the February festive for their patron St. Francis had become an affair for tourists. It was now managed mainly by local business people instead of by the fishermen, who in the past had formed a procession of boats and made offerings to supernatural entities associated with the sea. Still, villagers could now enjoy the large candomblé of December and January. During these months, rarely in others, the spirit father and mother in Coronas were possessed by the goddess Oxen, representing a higher level in the candomblé pantheon than the lesser spirits, who came regularly. Local candomblés, which lasted no more than 3 days, even in summer, couldn't rival those of Salvador, where they might last a month. And Crispin was a piddling Padre Santo compared with masters in the city. His house, made of unfinished wattle and daub, didn't have an air of prosperity. His saint's room was considered worthy enough, but women complained he should be more generous with his acolytes. He and Maria argued over her complaint that he called her only when he needed her services and never did anything in return, like a big man in a tribal society. A candomblé leader was expected to share with other members of his spiritual community. One woman who had also assisted Crispin during the 1970s, though she had yet to receive a spirit, had curtailed her participation because he never gave her anything. "He never got me a saint," she complained. "His saints never gave me anything, and the saints he got for other people never gave me anything." She was especially bitter after a saint at one of the ceremonies called on her to kill the animal. The person who kills the sacrificial chicken or lamb usually gets some of the money from the sponsors, but she got nothing. Candomblés were often part of a curing process that also might require a few days fasting. The spirit father or mother gave the person for whom the candomblé was being held a list of items to be supplied, including food and money. The spiritual leader was supposed to use some of the cash to buy ceremonial paraphernalia and to share the rest with his or her saint's daughters. Aaron Bapero saw candomblé as complementary rather than opposed to other curing techniques. Many people turned to candomblé only after unsuccessful attempts at cures by physicians. Similarly, many religious people, especially women, hedged their bets by attending Mass, taking part in candomblé, and holding prayer meetings for Catholic saints. The Riza, a small-scale prayer session attended by female neighbors and kin, had been the most common local religious event in the 1960s. Some candomblé masters prescribed cures on their own, but others, like Crispin, let their spirits diagnose and treat. Although both the masters in Coronas received several spirits, each had a regular caboclo used for curing. The diagnosis was done by tossing and studying shells. Patients were supposed to name their affliction. If the candomblé master, in the client's opinion, correctly identified the problem from the shell pattern, the patient would follow that master's advice. This usually entailed fasting and sponsoring a candomblé. Patients then got specific information about curing procedures by filling spirits' requests for beer, wine, rum, or chicken or lamb blood. Usually spirits also wanted cash. "The spirits are like children," said one woman. "They expect their demands to be satisfied, no matter what the circumstances." Curing was just one reason for candomblé. Others were held on special occasions, such as the leader's birthday. Many sponsors might contribute to the large-scale summer candomblés. Candomblé could be used for both good and evil. Alberto contended that people used candomblé to get rich. He said that Laurentino, the arrogant shopkeeper described in chapter 4, had abandoned candomblé but still used the devil dog he had relied on all his life. Candomblé could summon evil spirits, or diablos, to cause sickness and death. Our former cook Dora had heard of soul loss. When victims' souls were extracted or imprisoned by a candomblé master, they could weaken and eventually die. Release and survival could come only through candomblé. Alberto's statements to me about candomblé were very negative, although he admitted he sometimes attended just to enjoy. Ashamed of his wife's participation, he called candomblé a bad thing that can lead to ruin. "People say they get possessed," he said. Dora, an occasional participant, was more positive. She, Maria, and others told me about the social structure and cosmology of candomblé. The only formal local male role was that of a spirit father, but many spirits were male. There were no sons, just daughters of saints, though Crispin had once had a male assistant. Candomblé thus continued the traditional local male avoidance of religion. Women were routinely possessed by male and female spirits, but Crispin received just one female being, the goddess Oxen. When male spirits possessed females, the women's voices deepened. The same spirit might flit from person to person, and the same human might receive several saints in one session. Possession followed hours of drum beating, drinking, and dancing, often to the point of exhaustion. Sometimes possession was quick, and other times it took hours. A wind comes and enchants the saint's daughter. It makes her enter a trance and become receptive to the spirit world. "Everyone has a spirit within," a guardian angel explained Dora, "but some people also have the ability to receive spirits. Unfortunately, I don't. The spirit possession rested on a talent that some people were born with, others acquired, and many never got. Recognizing their talent, some people decided to enter candomblé. Maria, for example, reported as a girl she'd always been spiritually adept. In the shadows of domestic corners, she discerned the faces of spirits that other people never saw. Though she recognized her supernatural abilities, they lay dormant until her daughter entered adolescence. Then Maria turned to candomblé in earnest. By 1980, she had hosted 21 saints. An interesting feature of candomblé cosmology is its reproductive and kinship imagery. Like Catholicism, candomblé uses a kinship model for its spiritual community. The leaders, fathers, and mothers of saints symbolically gave birth to saints by permitting themselves to be possessed. The fathers and mothers also had children in the flesh. These were the daughters of saints, who assisted their parents and were themselves possessed by inferior spirits who were like the leaders' grandchildren. Maria's case makes the link between reproduction and spirit possession clear. Though she'd always recognized her supernatural talent, she didn't join Candomblé until her only daughter was 12 years old, when Maria began to have pains. She sought relief in the urban Candomblé community and has been active ever since. Maria despaired of having another child. Unlike most local women, she has been pregnant just once. However, Maria's spirit possession has produced 21 symbolic children. Remember that spirits with their childish whimsical demands were compared specifically to children. Maria's own daughter became a saint's daughter after one of her sons got sick. She sought a cure in Candomblé. At the ceremony, she had a vision that her son would improve and she would receive a saint. Both came to pass. Unlike her mother, Maria's daughter had received just one saint, but she had many real children. One woman active in Candomblé always got possessed during childbirth, again linking the religious system to reproduction. This was also an effective way of dealing with the pain, letting a spirit have the baby. Villagers' comments suggested that a slight stigma was attached to Candomblé, even by participants. They may have thought that I disapproved of this new dimension of local religious life. Alberto clearly detested Candomblé and avoided telling me that his wife and daughter had received saints. Because of the people who most often took part, Candomblé and Arembepe might be characterized as a training ground for deviants. Some examples. Laurencio, an unusual villager who now relied only on his devil dog, had taken part in Candomblé and still, as did his brother. Maria's ability to see imaginary faces may have been taken as evidence for psychosis in our society, but in hers it showed she had a talent that could blossom into religious activity. Maria and her daughter were incipient alcoholics. Both had once been classified as village prostitutes. Assertive, flamboyant, neither mother or daughter fulfilled local expectations about feminine behavior. They drank, told dirty jokes, and got possessed. When Maria, a large woman, saw me again in 1980, she yelled a greeting from a block away, rushed out, and practically lifted me with a bear hug. "Oh, Conrado, you've come back to take me to America." Women who've always been less powerful than men in Arembepe were also much more active in Candomblé. Twins, people with a history of mental problems, and Arembepe's only known homosexual were also Candomblé regulars. Were other potential deviants, such as the rich and recent immigrants, also active in Candomblé? I could find no evidence that villagers still linked economic success to Candomblé magic, as they had in 1973. No one named boat owners as Candomblé participants or even believers. Nor was there evidence for greater participation by immigrants from the northern fishing villages. Those low-paid workers could be expected to be envious of native Arembeperos and might have sought magical redress through Candomblé, but they weren't doing so. Instead, they were spending most of their time on long fishing trips and weekend drinking bouts. Candomblé remained mainly a domain for a few unusual men and many unusual women. Although powerless and unusual people predominated among its participants, the stigma attached to Candomblé was slight. In the old Arembepe, there had been diffuse knowledge of and faith in aspects of the Candomblé belief system, but the actual rituals and ceremonies had been absent. By 1980, if Catholic nuns could attend and enjoy Candomblé, most visitors reasoned there was little harm in it. So with a local economy that could now support religious activity, villagers were adopting external rituals to accompany and enlarge their pre-existing beliefs. The growth of religion was yet another manifestation of socio-cultural change of Arembepe's increasing social complexity. The end of Chapter 10.